On April 5, 1722, the crew of a Dutch ship unexpectedly discovered a patch of land in the southeastern Pacific Ocean. Rapanui, as the locals called it, appeared before the Europeans. The discoverers named it Easter Island in honor of the Catholic holiday. The island is known for its stone statues, but the history of the ancient civilization that created them is shrouded in mystery. When the first Europeans set foot on its soil, approximately 3,000 people lived there. But soon the population began to decline rapidly. By the end of the 19th century, only a few dozen Rapanui remained on the island. What caused their disappearance, and could the islanders have destroyed themselves? A barren land, half-starved natives with sharp spears, and giant stone statues. That is how James Cook saw Easter Island in 1774. On a small patch of land in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, the English navigator counted only 700 inhabitants, which seemed more than strange. Half a century earlier, the Dutchman Jacob Roggeveen, who discovered the island, spoke of 2,000 to 3,000 people. However, even this figure could indicate a kind of demographic crisis. According to many historians, Easter Island was originally inhabited by up to 15,000 natives. The indigenous population of Easter Island, or Rapanui as they are called by Polynesians, are Polynesians. They spoke one of the Polynesian languages, related to Tahitian, Tongan, Hawaiian, and the language of the New Zealand Maori. The exact date of the Polynesians' arrival on this island is unknown. From DNA research, scientists have concluded that it happened somewhere around the beginning of the 13th century, when the first human foot stepped on Easter Island was determined by geneticists from Stanford University. In 2021, they analyzed the DNA of more than 400 modern inhabitants of the Pacific archipelagos. It turned out that they all have common Polynesian roots. The results of the study helped to understand the route by which people settled the islands. The ancient people first set out to explore new territories around 830 AD. The Polynesians moved from Samoa to the west to Fiji and to the south to the island of Tonga. From the east, they reached the island of Rarotonga. From there, they then went to modern-day Tahiti and the Tuamotu archipelago. The final point of the eastern direction was Easter Island. It was located the furthest away. The Rapanui grew sugarcane, sweet potatoes, coconuts, and yams. They may even have had something resembling writing. At least in the 19th century, the Catholic priest Eugène Hérault discovered wooden tablets with strange symbols called rongorongo on Easter Island. But scientists still cannot decipher them. There is a suggestion that it may not be writing, but simply drawings and perhaps even imitation of some European writing that they saw in the 18th century from these European navigators who sailed there. But why did the Rapanui population begin to decline? Where did they disappear to from Easter Island? And most importantly, why? Geneticists from the University of Lausanne tried to find answers to these questions. In September 2024, they analyzed the DNA of the remains of 15 natives. The bones were stored in the National Museum of Natural History in Paris. The study showed that these people died between 1670 and 1950. Moreover, the upper limit is apparently inaccurate because records remained in the museum archive that the remains were received earlier. Most likely, the bones belonged to natives who lived before the arrival of slave traders. In the 60s of the 19th century, Peruvians exported Rapanui to South America in huge quantities. There were then just over 100 inhabitants left on Easter Island. But the most surprising discovery awaited scientists when they deciphered the genetic code of the Rapanui. It turned out that they are 10% related to pre-Columbian Indians. This refuted previous historians' ideas about the connections between the indigenous population of South America and the Polynesians, or rather, about their absence. It was previously believed that there were no contacts between them. This admixture appeared somewhere in the 13th to 15th centuries. There may be two options here. Either the Polynesians sailed to the shores of South America, most likely that was the case, or the South Americans sailed to Easter Island, which in principle is also possible since there is evidence that in the 15th century, the Incas built a fleet and set out to explore the nearby seas. Who sailed to whom is still unclear. Easter Island is one of the most remote land areas on the planet. It is more than 3,500 kilometers to the mainland. But the Rapanui could also travel on water over vast distances as well as the Incas. The ancient Polynesians were experienced seafarers. In those days, even the developed civilizations of Europe and Asia were mainly engaged in coastal navigation along the shores. In fact, only Columbus at the end of the 15th century dared to cross the ocean. However, the Polynesians were not afraid of vast distances. They built large canoes. As a balancer, they used a log that was tied across the boat. This helped maintain balance on the waves in strong winds. Sometimes two boats were connected to each other and a catamaran was obtained. Mats served as sails. The Polynesians went on long journeys with their whole families. They took supplies of food and seeds of plants with them, which they planted in a new place. They sailed in caravans. The canoes were within sight of each other in order to signal to the others if someone saw land. They had special priests who were very knowledgeable in navigation, knew sea winds, currents, and were able to navigate by the stars. Thanks to this, the Polynesians settled all these territories. They penetrated into many places where there was no human at all. For example, they appeared in New Zealand in the 13th century, where no human had ever set foot before. According to one version, seafaring could have been an indirect cause of the Rapanui's extinction. They cut down hectares of forests to build ocean canoes. Wood was generally a very popular material on Easter Island. Wood was used for cooking and burning the bodies of the dead. On wooden runners, the natives transported their famous statues, the Moai, all over the island. The mysterious statues, by the way, weigh much less than it might seem at first glance. They were made not of stone, but of tuff or compressed volcanic ash. At some point, the Rapanui uprooted the entire forest, and this led to soil erosion. By the beginning of the 17th century, an ecological disaster began on Easter Island. Plants and animals died, and then, according to some scientists, a mass famine began. However, with the theory of the so-called Rapanui ecocide, not everything is so simple. The Rapanui really destroyed the natural ecosystem, but this did not lead to the self-destruction of civilization, as is often said. The islanders adapted to the new conditions. They had a unique system of agriculture. They planted special stone gardens that preserved the fertility of the volcanic soil and used ash as fertilizer. Man-made landscapes occupied vast spaces, but their real area turned out to be 5 times smaller than scientists previously thought. This was revealed by satellite images taken in July 2024. Stone gardens were quite enough for the Rapanui to live on Easter Island. In addition, they always had fresh water. In the center of Easter Island, there are craters of extinct volcanoes, in which there are quite large lakes, which serve as a source of fresh water for the inhabitants of the island. So it was possible to survive there. And in addition, of course, they were engaged in the development of marine resources. They hunted seabirds, marine mammals, turtles, and of course they caught fish and mollusks. But if the Rapanui were not dying of hunger, then why did the Europeans find only 1/5 of the former number of natives by the beginning of the 18th century? Now, scientists are inclined to the version that in fact there were never 15,000 inhabitants on Easter Island. Probably these ideas about the large number of inhabitants of the island in earlier times are erroneous. There is no bottleneck observed there around the 17th century. But such a bottleneck was at the beginning of the settlement of this island around the 13th century when the first settlers arrived there. There were initially few of them. Accordingly, their genetic diversity was small, and then the population of this island gradually grew. Somewhere it reached 2,000 to 3,000 people. Explaining why James Cook saw only a few hundred Rapanui is also quite simple. Dutch explorers brought smallpox and other diseases unknown to the natives. The inhabitants of the Pacific island had no immunity to them, and this caused the death of most of the population.